Acts chapter 17. Do you have a fixed point of reference? Some of you are wondering why this chair is up here. Oh, going to be scanning the congregation this morning, and the first person who is sleeping is going to come up here and sit. I read that the United States Coast Guard utilizes a variety of navigational buoys. Those are deployed for the purpose of assisting the navigation of the vessels. They indicate the location of channels. They mark any hazards that may be in the ocean. Their warnings. Suppose that there's this buoy out in the water and it stays right where it is because it is anchored. But one day this buoy gets to thinking and he says, you know, I really don't like being so restricted. I want to be free to move around and do what I want to do. So the buoy manages to release itself from this anchor. And at first he feels so free, just moving around the water. He's never quite felt this kind of freedom before. He's elated. It's really what he's been looking for. To be released. But all of a sudden, the waves begin to toss. The waters begin to be rough and hard. And he realizes that while he's no longer anchored in this one spot, he is now being tossed and turned, and he's really become a slave to the reckless waters. And he ends up not fulfilling the purpose for his existence. So, what in the world is this chair about? This chair, we're going to call it our fixed point of reference. Fixed point of reference. There it is. Doesn't move. It's fixed. We Christians have to some people, a peculiar way of thinking. We are thinking in such a way that what we think flies directly into the face of the world. We've got this view of reality that doesn't quite square up with the way the world thinks. And the more the world changes, the more it buys into atheism and humanism and a lot of other isms, the more conflict we have with the world. We need to understand, as Christians, why we think the way we do. Why our way of thinking is so different from the way the world thinks. Everybody, whether they know it or not, has a worldview. That's where this fixed point of reference comes into play. What is it? I want you to let your imagination sort of follow this. I'm in a humongous dark room. It is dark. I can't see my hand before me. And I'm just wandering around in this room trying to feel my way. There are no corners. It's a round room. And the dark seems as thick as a Baptist hymnal. And I'm thinking, I need to find out where I am. And so I feel in the darkness, and all of a sudden, I feel something. What is this? And I'm feeling of it, trying to discover what it is. It's got legs. It's got 4 legs and a seat. And it's got a back on it. And I can't move it. It's fixed. Let's see. Oh boy. It feels good to sit down. At least I've got someplace I know where it is. But I can't just sit here. I mean, I need to find out what else is in this dark room. I can't get too far from it. I don't know if I'll ever find it again. So I kind of, I reach out, kind of grope my way through the darkness. I don't want to get too far away. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll do this. I'll get back to it safe then. I know where it is. There it is. That's my fixed point of reference in this dark space. It's my home base. I can send out feelers. I can navigate from it. But I know where it is now. It's my home base. Now, what would happen if I, in the darkness, pick this chair up. And I go wandering around, trying to see what else is in this room. Now the problem is, I don't know where I was. I don't know where this chair belongs now. You see, a fixed point of reference has to be, first of all, separate from you and me. It has to exist alone, on its own. It stands alone. And secondly, it has to be immovable. Can't be moved. It's fixed. It is a fixed point of reference. Now, if I pick it up, it becomes part of me. Part of my consciousness. If I make it mobile, it isn't a fixed point of reference any longer. I never know where I am because the stupid thing moved. Now, in our text, the Apostle Paul is addressing philosophers, what we would call think tanks of their day in Greece, in particular in Athens. A place where a bunch of shrines have been scattered throughout the city and on Mars Hill. Shrines that were placed there, each one to a different god. He comes up on this and he sees one shrine inscribed to an unknown God. To an unknown God. Mars Hill, in particular, was one of the ancient fountainheads for atheism, humanism, rationalism. The idea that man, through his own thought process, can discover truth. The Bible says in verse 21 that these men spent their time in nothing else but either to tell or to hear something new. They're standing around these shrines. And the Apostle Paul sees them. It's like a big Oprah show. They're talking. One of them says, well, what do you think? And another one says, well, how about this idea? Would this work for you? And there's another one over here he says, what have you heard about this? And they're just carrying on all this stuff. Well, this is my opinion. I feel this way about it. Just one big Oprah show. And it ends the same way. Because they're spending all this time talking, and they never really find the answers. And Paul walks up on that and he says, hey guys, I've got an idea. They look over at this guy and they say, okay, come over here and speak. Now, at this point, we'll read the text in a moment. But at this point, you have to understand that Paul is really about to face a challenge. Now, it's not much of a challenge when a missionary like Paul is making his way around the countryside, and he always stopped at the synagogue where there were Jews. And he argued with them about the fact that Christ, the Messiah, was already here. They had a portion of the scripture. They had been to Sunday school. So they somewhat understood what Paul was saying. But in our text, Paul is not in the midst of a synagogue of Jews. He's in the presence of Greek Gentiles who question the very existence of God, let alone him being the Messiah. At least he had a place to start with the Jews. But where's he going to start with these intelligent, educated think tanks? How's he going to get this thing started? There's something that you and I need to think about. That there's a world outside this building that's never been to Sunday school. Can you imagine going out here and using some of the conversation that we Christians use, Christianese, to talk to one of those people who know nothing about our God? Well, pardon me. Yes, what can I do for you? Are you born again? Well, yes, I've had many lives. No, that's not what I mean. What I meant is, are you washed in the blood? I hope not. I sure hope not. What are you talking about? Now that gives you an idea of what Paul was up against, the challenge he was facing to speak to this group of men. And so Paul very carefully lays a foundation of the Christian worldview. And that's what I want to point out to you in our text. The first foundation stone that he lays is this: God is creator. Look at his words in verse 24. Verse just above that, it says, therefore, the one whom you worship without knowing, him I proclaim to you, God who made the world and everything in it. The very first thing that Paul addressed was origin. Origin. Where did we come from? How did we get here? Why are we here? Isn't it funny that people wonder about those things? Especially people like these Greeks, because they didn't believe in the God of Israel. But they still wondered these things. They still looked for answers to those sort of questions. Animals don't ever ask those things. You'll never find a chicken asking, as he struts around the barnyard, why am I here? Where'd I come from anyway? What's my destiny? He doesn't ask those questions. Animals never worry about, why am I here? Now, other chickens know the answer to that question, but they can't tell him. They're on the buffet line down at Michelle's. That's why they were here. He doesn't know that. But animals don't ask those questions, no matter how intelligent we might think they be. Whether they're a dog, or porpoise, or giraffe, or an earthworm. They don't ask those questions, but humans do. Why? It's called self-awareness. Animals don't have self-awareness. But we're aware, we're self-aware. We are a unique creature. We're people. We ask big questions. So, Paul answers the big question they have about origin. He made everything. He is God. God is creator. But now it gets real sticky. Even if they wanted to believe that God is the origin of all things, they're going to struggle with this one. Second foundation stone is God is Lord over all things. Paul said, since he is Lord of heaven and earth. You see, that's one thing that rubs people the wrong way. Whenever you present the fact that there is a higher authority than you or me, it gets very sticky. Paul said, yes, there is a God. Yes, He is Creator. And He is Lord over all things. What does that mean? It means that God is in charge. It means that what He says goes. It means that what He says is right, and what He says is wrong. It means that what He says is true. And what He says is false. Everybody has their idea about what's right and wrong, right? But where does it come from? Paul says that God determines what's right. Now, you know what that makes God? It makes Him our moral authority. Our moral authority. Think about it this way. Without God's standard, how can we know if something is good? How do you measure that, church? Even an atheist will say, well, I've always tried to be a good person. I've always tried to do right. But how can you measure good? And how can you measure right if you don't have a moral authority? That basic foundation. Recognizing God as Lord over all things, being our moral authority. Guides us in our thoughts, what we think. It guides us in how we do our job. It guides us even in how we raise our children. Basic, foundational truth. In verse 24 and 25, we have the third foundational stone. God is self-existent and self-defining. In verse 24, latter part of it, says, since He is Lord of heaven and earth, He does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor is He worshipped with men's hands as though He needed anything, since He gives to all life, breath, and all things. In other words, He exists because of himself. These Greeks were not so different from many people today. They worked from the ground up. I can just see these Greeks out, and they're gathering up these huge boulders. Barely can one man pick them up. And they bring their boulders into the gathering. They put them on a table. And they take their chisels and their hammers, and each one looks at his rock and he says, let's see. What do I want? What kind of God do I want? I think I want a God who is fierce. Who is fierce. So he begins to work on that, and he puts a lot of muscle. Creates this God of fierceness. And this guy next to him, he says, well, I think I want a God who knows everything. So he goes to work. And he puts eyeballs all over this rock. Another note here, he says, I want a God that's fertile, virile. So he goes to work and chisels out sexual organs all over this rock. And that becomes his God. They create their own God the way they want him to be. And they worship that kind of God. In effect, worshiping themselves. Paul is pointing out to these guys that the God that I serve doesn't need you or you to form him into your image. He doesn't need you to carve him out and put him on a shelf and every day pass by and dust him off. God, my God, doesn't do that. He exists in and of himself. And he's self-defining. If he wasn't, he would not be God. Now here's the point, church. God doesn't ask us for our opinion about him. And then change himself around to match our opinion. God's not here to please me and you. He's here to be pleased, to be worshiped because he is worthy. If you want to know God, you've got to know him as he is. Because your opinion is totally irrelevant. The fourth foundation stone is God created you for a purpose. Look at verse 25. He gives to all breath and all things, life and breath, all things. And he has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings. He knew you before you were born. Not only did he know you, but he knew where you would be born, and when you would be born, and why. He knew everything about you. He knew everything about what you would be. He created you for a purpose, for a destiny. He has a plan for your life. You were made, handmade, if you will, by a skilled craftsman. It's that fact that gives we Christians the weird idea that life is sacred. Human life is sacred. That sounds good, doesn't it? I want you to think about something. Think about what we're teaching our children. Let's engage our imagination again. Here's a group of young students. They're entering their biology class in middle school. Here's what they might hear from their teacher. Kids, welcome to Biology 101. We're going to learn a lot of fun things. We're going to cut up frogs. We're going to get some flowers, and we're going to learn about pistils and stamens. We're going to have all kinds of fun. But the first thing you need to know above all things is this. You are an accident. You're an accident. You have absolutely no purpose in being here. You have no meaning. You're nothing but a meaningless conglomeration of molecules. Billions and billions and billions of years ago, just by chance, the dust and the molecules came together. And they said, hey, let's be organic. So they began to swim around in the primordial soup. And eventually, after millions of years, they grew tiny little feet. And with those feet, they were able to climb up on the land. And millions of more years passed, and they grew these feathers and furs and became a higher form of life. They finally became monkeys. And those monkeys developed into apes. And after a while, those apes decided they would shave. And they became what you are today. Yep. From the goo to you, by way of the zoo. And as such, you really don't have a reason to be here. I mean, you really don't. When you die, it won't make any difference in the universe. When you die, you're just going to become some compost. Okay, class, that's all we've got time for today. Now, when the bell rings, you go down the hall to that new class that's just started this week. Teacher, what class is that? Oh, it's this new class on self-esteem. These little kids go into the classroom with this teacher who's going to teach them about self-esteem. Kids, listen up. It's time for us to start. I know that you're an accident. All of you are an accident, but since this is a class on self-esteem, you need to know this. You're a good accident. You're a really good accident. You've got so much wonderful potential within you that you can cause even more accidents. Just do it safely. You'll be fine. Every day you get before the mirror and you repeat this. I'm important because I can do things. You know, I can't help what the response would be from kids who can't do things. From kids who are not appreciated. Kids who are not accepted just don't belong. Where do you think the peer pressure that your middle and senior high school students, where do you think that comes from? You see, every kid wants to belong. They want to feel appreciated. When you take God out of the picture, our kids feel everything but that. You might be a big tough guy, you've had a rough life, and you don't mind speaking up and saying, well, yeah, I've got my own God, I got my own way of worshiping God, blah, blah, blah. And your kids, whether they're grown or still students, are following right along in your footsteps because you don't understand that God created you for a purpose. And maybe even unwittingly, you've taught that to your children. And that's why they feel the peer pressure. And that's why they live the way that they do. kids don't belong. They don't feel very good about themselves. We teach our children that. One writer, Frank Peretti, calls this the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer syndrome. Think about it. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer had a very shiny nose. I got to sing it to remember the words. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer had a very shiny nose. And if you ever saw it, you'd say it glows. All of the other reindeers used to laugh and call him names. They wouldn't let poor Rudolph join in any reindeer games. Then one foggy Christmas Eve, Santa came to say, Rudolph, with your nose so bright, will you guide my sleigh tonight? Then all the reindeer loved him as they shouted out with glee, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, you'll go down in history. Rudolph, you've got this shiny nose, but, you know, you're a great kid now. Well, thanks to God. So thanks a lot. Where were y'all, you reindeers, when I was being left out? When I was being made fun of because of my shiny red nose? Friends like you, I don't need any enemies. Okay, I want to wrap this thing up. Let me tell you something. You have a friend. He loves you even though you may have a very shiny nose. There's a God who made you, and maybe He gave you that shiny nose. But He made you for a purpose. Just like you are. God didn't decide one day, I'm going to take this canvas and I'm going to create Don Hatcher. He steps back and looks at that canvas and he says, let's see. What can I do to hurt Don? The foundation of a Christian's self-esteem is not in what you can do. It is not in how you look. It does not matter how athletic you are. It has to do with the truth that God put you here for a purpose. Every single one of you, God put you on this planet for a purpose. He has a plan. You've got worth. You've got value. How do you know? Because He says so. How do you know how much something is worth? You can only determine what it's worth by what somebody is willing to pay. You may have a piece of lakefront property out here, and you may be asking $1 million, and you say, this is worth $1 million. That's what I want out of it. But you can't get anybody to offer you over $250,000 for it. You know what it's worth? It's worth what people will pay for it. How much are you worth? You are worth the life of God's Son, who so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. And God desires a relationship with you. That's the final foundation principle. God did this so that men would seek after him and reach out to him and find him, though he's not far from any one of us. We can grope in the darkness. What's this all about? Where am I? Why am I here? What's the purpose of all this? We just keep on groping until this thing is fixed. I think I'll have a seat here, and I will not move away. It's fixed. It's my point of reference. You know, folks, maybe some of you here, your life is in such a big mess and has been. Things just will not go right. I mean, it just seems to never go right. You are miserable. You really have no self-esteem. Your problem is that you don't have this fixed point of reference. Because when you find that and you settle in there, then life starts making sense, has some purpose. When you settle there, it's kind of like being that buoy being anchored. As long as the anchor's there, the buoy does what it's supposed to do. As long as you've got a fixed point of reference, you're going to be okay. Now, maybe you don't have it. So how do you get it? Well, you've got to come to God through his Son and repent of your sins. Repent of your stinking sins and ask him to forgive you. And acknowledge him and accept him as Lord of your life. He's your boss. Whether you like it or not, he's your boss. He doesn't really care what your definition is. He's self-existent. He defines himself. You don't need to try to define who God is. It won't work. You can sit there and pretend, I'm not hearing all this. I'm not hearing all this. Well, that's your choice. At some point, either here or in eternity, you'll realize what that buoy realized. Boy, I made a mistake. I made a fatal mistake. I should have stayed where I was, anchored. If you want to stand up, we'll have a song. A hymn of decision. Maybe you're at a point in your life where you've been feeling some of the things I've talked about this morning as far as you not having any purpose in life. Nothing goes right. You don't understand why you're here. You're doubting whether God even created you or not. And, you want to respond to some of the things I've said this morning, mainly that you need a fixed point of anchor, a fixed point, just nail it down that God is your fixed point of reference. And you'll find the answers that you're looking for. Would you stand, please? We're going to sing. We're going to sing a couple of verses, Van, and you want to respond in some way, you do so.